What happens when you open your dead father's safe and find something that will change your entire family's life forever? Stop the tape. Dr. Phil's voice cut through the studio like a blade. The cameras froze. The audience held its breath. In his hands, Dr. Phil held a small metal safe, and what he had just seen inside had drained every ounce of color from his face. What was inside that safe would shatter a family's entire reality in less than 60 seconds. The cameras had been rolling for barely 20 minutes when it happened. Sarah Mitchell, 52, and her son David, 28, had come to the Dr. Phil show with what seemed like a straightforward estate dispute. Their father, Robert Mitchell, had died 6 months earlier from a sudden heart attack. The grief was still raw, the wounds still fresh. "My father was my hero," Sarah had told Dr. Phil during the initial segment, her voice breaking. "He built a successful construction business from nothing. He provided for us. He taught me everything about integrity and hard work." David nodded beside his mother, wiping tears. "Grandpa was the best man I ever knew. He never missed a single one of my baseball games. Not one." Dr. Phil leaned forward in his chair, his signature pose of focused attention. "So tell me, what brought you here today? What's the conflict?" But neither Sarah nor David knew they were about to discover something that would rewrite their entire family history. Sarah explained that after Robert's death, they'd found a safe in his office. It was a small fireproof box, locked with a combination. Robert had never mentioned it to anyone. For months they tried to figure out the combination, cycling through birthdays, anniversaries, every significant date they could think of. "Finally, last week, we got a locksmith to open it," Sarah said. "And inside we found documents. Legal papers. Things that didn't make sense." Dr. Phil's expression shifted. He'd been in this business for 3 decades. He knew when a story was about to take a dark turn. "What kind of documents?" David pulled out a manila envelope from his bag. His hands were shaking. "Adoption papers. From 1972. But they have my mom's name on them." The studio went completely silent. Sarah's voice cracked. "Dr. Phil, those papers say I was adopted. But my parents never told me. Not once in 52 years. My mother died 8 years ago. My father just died. And now I find out my entire life was a lie?" The audience gasped. Dr. Phil stood up, something he rarely did during the early part of a show. He walked over to Sarah and took the envelope from David's trembling hands. "May I?" he asked gently. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Phil opened the envelope and pulled out the yellowed documents. His eyes scanned the pages, and his jaw visibly tightened. He looked up at Sarah, then at David, then back at the papers. "Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead." "Sarah," Dr. Phil said slowly, "there's more in this envelope than just adoption papers." "What do you mean?" Sarah whispered. Dr. Phil pulled out a second document. It was a birth certificate. Original, dated April 3, 1972. And on it, in the space marked "Mother," was a name that made Sarah's blood run cold. "Margaret Mitchell," Sarah read aloud. That's my mom. My mom's name." "Keep reading," Dr. Phil said softly. Sarah's eyes moved down the page. Under "Father," the space was marked "Unknown." But paperclipped to the birth certificate was a handwritten note on stationery from 1972. The handwriting was shaky, feminine, desperate. Sarah began to read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. "To whoever finds this, I'm sorry. I was 17. He was my teacher. I couldn't keep her. My parents would have killed me. Please tell her someday that I loved her. Please tell her I'm sorry. Margaret." The studio audience collectively gasped. Some began crying. Dr. Phil held up his hand. "Hold on. Stop the tape." The cameras stopped rolling. The red lights went dark. The entire production crew froze. Dr. Phil turned to Sarah. "Before we continue, I need to ask you something very important. Are you ready to know the full truth of what's in this safe? Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Dr. Phil reached into the envelope and pulled out a small, faded photograph. He looked at it for a long moment, then turned it toward Sarah. The photo showed a teenage girl, maybe 16 or 17, visibly pregnant, standing in front of a high school. On the back, written in the same handwriting as the note, Margaret, senior year, 1971. 3 months before Sarah was born. But Dr. Phil had seen something else in that photo. Something that changed everything. Sarah, Dr. Phil said quietly, your mother Margaret didn't adopt you from a stranger. She gave birth to you when she was 17 years old. And then her parents, your grandparents, Robert and Catherine Mitchell, they legally adopted you. They raised you as their daughter instead of their granddaughter. Sarah's face went white. David grabbed his mother's hand. My grandparents were actually my parents, Sarah said, her voice breaking. And my mom was my sister? Biologically, yes, Dr. Phil said. But Sarah, what your parents did, they protected your mother. They protected you. In 1972, a pregnant teenager from a conservative family had almost no options. Your grandparents, your biological parents, they made sure you had a life. They made sure Margaret could finish school. Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. He turned to his production team. Bring Robin in here. And get me Dr. Linda on the phone. This family needs grief counseling right now, not a TV show. The audience watched in stunned silence as Dr. Phil's wife Robin, a regular consultant on the show, walked onto the stage. She immediately went to Sarah and embraced her while she sobbed. Dr. Phil knelt down in front of Sarah's chair, breaking every rule of television staging. Sarah, listen to me. Your father, Robert, he loved you more than anything in this world. You said he never missed a baseball game. That's because you were his daughter in every way that mattered. He and your mother Catherine, they chose to raise you. They sacrificed their golden years to give you a childhood. But they lied to me for 52 years. Sarah choked out. They protected you for 52 years. Dr. Phil corrected firmly. There's a difference. He reached back into the safe and pulled out one final item. It was a sealed letter, addressed to Sarah, in Robert's handwriting. The postmark showed it had never been mailed. It had been sitting in that safe, waiting. I think, Dr. Phil said softly, your father left this here for you to find after he was gone. When you were ready. May I? Sarah nodded, and Dr. Phil carefully opened the envelope. He pulled out several handwritten pages and began to read aloud. My dear Sarah, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've finally opened the safe. I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to tell you this while I was alive. Your mother, my daughter Margaret, she was just a child herself when she got pregnant. The father was her English teacher, a man twice her age who took advantage of her trust. He disappeared the moment he found out. The revelation hit the studio like a physical blow. David stood up abruptly. Wait. Are you saying my grandfather was, that my mom was? Dr. Phil held up his hand. David, what your grandfather is saying is that your mother is a survivor. And your great-grandparents protected her from a predator. He continued reading. Catherine and I made the decision that night. We would adopt Sarah as our own daughter. Margaret could finish school, go to college, have a life. And Sarah would grow up loved, protected, never knowing the circumstances of her birth. We thought we were doing the right thing. Maybe we were. Maybe we weren't. But Sarah, I want you to know, you were never anything but our daughter. Our beloved daughter. I'm sorry if this truth hurts you. But I'm not sorry we raised you. You were the greatest gift of our lives. Dad. The silence that followed was sacred. Sarah was sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Robin held her tightly. David had tears streaming down his face. Even the hardened camera operators were wiping their eyes. Dr. Phil sat back in his chair, the letter still in his hands. Sarah, your father left you one more thing in this safe. He pulled out a small jewelry box. Inside was a simple gold locket. Dr. Phil opened it to reveal 2 tiny photographs inside, one of baby Sarah, one of teenage Margaret holding her. He kept this his entire life, Dr. Phil said. Hidden away, but never forgotten. Your father knew that someday, you might need to know the truth. And he made sure that when you found it, you'd also find proof of how much you were loved. But what happened next is something no one in the room, or watching at home, saw coming. Sarah looked up at Dr. Phil through her tears. Dr. Phil, there's something else in the safe we haven't opened yet. David pulled out a second envelope. We were too scared. Dr. Phil took it. Sealed with wax, old-fashioned style. On the front, for Margaret. From Dad. Open only after I'm gone. Margaret is still alive? Dr. Phil asked. Yes. She's 70 now. Lives in Florida. We haven't told her we found the safe yet. Dr. Phil looked at the envelope. This isn't addressed to you. I know, Sarah said. But I need to know what it says before I can face her. Dr. Phil paused. Finally, he nodded. Whatever is in here, remember, your father loved both of you. He broke the seal. Inside was a sheet of paper and a small key. He read silently first, then began aloud. My dear Margaret, I hope when you read this, Sarah will be standing beside you. I hope she understands now why we did what we did. I hope she forgives us. But more than anything, I hope she knows she was loved. The key in this envelope opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Inside, you'll find letters I wrote to you over the years. Letters I never sent. Letters where I told you I was proud of you, that I forgave you, that I understood. I was never angry at you, sweetheart. I was angry at the man who hurt you. I was angry at a world that punished girls for the crimes of men. But I was never angry at you. The day Sarah was born was the happiest day of my life. She gave me a second chance at fatherhood. And you gave me a second chance to protect someone I loved. Thank you for that gift. Thank you for trusting me. I love you both. Always. Dad. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The studio erupted in tears. Not polite sniffles, but full, body-shaking sobs from the audience. Sarah collapsed into Robin's arms. David was openly weeping. Dr. Phil set the letter down carefully. He took a moment to compose himself, something viewers almost never saw. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. Sarah, I've been doing this show for 30 years. I've seen families torn apart by lies, by secrets, by betrayals. But what your father did, that wasn't a lie. That was a sacrifice. He and your mother Catherine, they gave up their retirement years, their freedom, their golden years to raise you. And Margaret, your birth mother, she gave up being your mother so you could have a better life. He leaned forward. You weren't robbed of the truth, Sarah. You were protected by it. And now that you know, you have a choice. You can be angry at people who are gone, or you can honor their sacrifice by healing the relationship with Margaret that they died trying to protect. Sarah looked up, her face red and swollen from crying. How do I even start that conversation? Dr. Phil picked up the small key and placed it in her hand. You start by giving her this key. You start by reading her these letters. And you start by telling her what her father, your grandfather, wanted her to know, that he never stopped loving her. That he never blamed her. And that the daughter she gave up became the greatest joy of his life. The healing that began in that moment would change everything. After the cameras stopped rolling, Dr. Phil did something he rarely did. He canceled the rest of the day's tapings. He brought in his team of therapists and counselors. He arranged for Sarah, David, and Margaret to have private sessions. He personally called Margaret in Florida and gently prepared her for what her daughter had discovered. 2 weeks later, Sarah and Margaret appeared together on a follow-up episode. They had opened the safety deposit box together. They had read the letters. They had cried together, grieved together, and begun healing together. Margaret, now 70, sat beside Sarah on the Dr. Phil stage and told her story publicly for the first time. I was 17 and terrified. My teacher told me he loved me. I believed him. When I got pregnant, he denied it was his and threatened me if I told anyone. My parents, Sarah's grandparents, they saved my life. They saved her life. I got to finish school. I got to go to college. I got to have a career. And I got to watch Sarah grow up, even if it was from the role of sister instead of mother. Did you ever regret it? Dr. Phil asked gently. Every single day, Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. But I also thank God every single day that she was safe. That she was loved. That she had parents who would protect her from everything, even from the truth of how she came into this world. Sarah reached over and took Margaret's hand. I spent 2 weeks being angry, hurt, confused. But then I read Dad's letters. And I realized, Mom, you were a kid. You were a victim. And somehow, out of something terrible, my grandparents, my parents, they made something beautiful. They made a family. The studio audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation that lasted 3 full minutes. Dr. Phil waited for the applause to die down. This is what healing looks like, folks. Not forgetting, but choosing to honor the love that survived the pain. He turned to the camera. If there's someone in your life who made a sacrifice you didn't understand, if there's a secret weighing on you, if there's forgiveness you've been withholding, learn from Sarah and Margaret. The past can't change, but your relationship to it can. The legacy of that open safe extended far beyond one family. The episode became one of the most watched in the show's history and sparked a national conversation about family secrets. Sarah and Margaret started a support group for families navigating similar revelations. David began speaking at schools about resilience. Sarah keeps the safe in her home, still holding her father's letters. She added one of her own, telling him she understands. That she forgives. That she's grateful. Dr. Phil later called it one of the most powerful moments of his career. That safe didn't contain secrets. He wrote. It contained love letters. From pain to healing. Sometimes the things we fear most are actually the keys to setting us free.